The Murdochs. The Murdochs are not simply a rich family. They are a machine of influence that has shaped headlines, elections, and public opinion for decades. What began with a single inherited newspaper in Australia became one of the most powerful media empires in the modern world. But, like many dynasties, the greatest threat was never outside competition. It was succession. Because behind Rupert Murdoch's authority stood a more dangerous question. What happens when a founder who controls everything can no longer control the family itself? That question did not stay private. It moved into courtrooms, boardrooms, and the Murdoch bloodline. This is not just a story about money. It is a story about power, inheritance, loyalty, and the price of keeping control inside a dynasty. Before we go deeper into the Murdoch Empire, a quick question for you. Do you think media dynasties like this still shape politics and public opinion today? Let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in how powerful families build and protect their influence across generations, subscribe to the channel. The Murdoch story began in 1952. Rupert Murdoch was just 21 when his father, Sir Keith Murdoch, died and left him the News, a newspaper in Adelaide. It was a modest inheritance. Rupert turned it into a launchpad. Through the 1950s and 1960s, he bought struggling papers across Australia, cut costs, modernised formats, and pushed circulation hard. By the late 1960s, he was already one of Australia's most aggressive media proprietors. Then, he went bigger. In 1969, he entered Britain by buying News of the World. A year later, he took over The Sun and transformed it into a tabloid powerhouse. After that, the expansion became global. Murdoch entered the United States, built Fox into a major television force, moved into film, and later added prestige and financial influence through assets such as the Wall Street Journal. What started as one inherited paper had become a transatlantic media empire. And with that empire came a dynasty problem every founder eventually faces: who inherits the power? Rupert Murdoch did not build a simple family business. He married 4 times and had 6 children. But when the succession story is told, 4 names matter most: Prudence, Elizabeth, Lachlan, and James. Prudence, the eldest, stayed mostly outside day-to-day management. Elizabeth built her own media credentials and was often seen as independently formidable. James rose deep into the corporate structure and for years looked like a serious heir. But the most important son became Lachlan. He stepped away at times, returned, and ultimately emerged as the child most closely aligned with Rupert's instincts and style of leadership. That mattered because succession at the Murdoch Empire was never just about executive titles. It was about the Murdoch Family Trust, the mechanism that determined who would hold the real voting power over the companies. Inside the Murdoch world, that trust mattered more than personality, more than job titles, and in the end, perhaps even more than merit. Because in dynasties, the public hierarchy is often not the real hierarchy. The empire's most explosive crisis came in 2011. Journalists at Murdoch-owned News of the World were accused of hacking voicemails belonging to celebrities, politicians, and crime victims. Then came the detail that turned scandal into outrage. The phone of murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler had also been accessed. Britain erupted. Politicians moved. Public anger surged. Murdoch's empire, which had long seemed untouchable, suddenly looked toxic. Rupert Murdoch responded with a brutal act of damage control. After 168 years, News of the World was shut down. But the damage had already spread. Rupert and James Murdoch were hauled before Parliament. The hearings were humiliating, historic, and watched around the world. Reuters and other major outlets documented how the scandal shook not only the company, but also the internal succession logic of the family. James, who had been central to the European business, came under heavy scrutiny. His standing weakened. And in the years that followed, Lachlan moved closer to the center of power. The lesson was brutal. In a dynasty, a scandal does not only destroy reputations, it also decides which children remain trusted when survival is on the line. If this story surprises you, Wait until you see what happened next. Some of the most powerful dynasties in the world have faced similar internal battles. If you enjoy deep dives into powerful families and billion-dollar empires, consider subscribing, because the Murdochs are only one chapter. In September 2023, Rupert Murdoch stepped down as chairman of Fox Corp and News Corp, ending one of the longest leadership eras in global media. He became chairman emeritus. Lachlan Murdoch became the central operating heir, sole chairman of News Corp, and chair and CEO of Fox. Reuters described the move as the transition that cemented Lachlan's leadership. On the surface, that looked like the succession question had finally been settled, but it had not, because the deeper issue was not who held the office, it was who would ultimately control the voting structure after Rupert, and that battle was still alive. This is the Murdoch Code. Ownership is not enough. Control is everything. Rupert Murdoch understood what many founders never fully grasp. A dynasty survives not by being rich, but by controlling the mechanism of decision-making. That is why the Murdoch Empire was built around voting power concentrated inside the family. For decades, that structure allowed Rupert to dominate companies whose ownership was otherwise spread across public markets. It was an elegant design, and it came with a dangerous flaw. Because the same structure that protects a dynasty can also turn siblings into rivals. Once several heirs stand near the controls, the question changes. It is no longer how the empire was built, it is who gets to govern it, and on what terms. That is where Murdoch stopped being just a business story. It became a family war waiting to happen, and then it did. After Rupert stepped back, the succession fight moved into court. Reuters reported that Rupert tried to change the family trust to secure Lachlan's long-term control and block interference from his other 3 older children. A Nevada commissioner later found that attempt had been made in bad faith. That alone would have been explosive. But the bigger twist came in 2025. Reuters reported that the Murdoch family reached a deal that effectively cemented Lachlan's control of the empire, while James, Elizabeth, and Prudence agreed to exit and take cash. Litigation tied to the trust was terminated, so the long-running question was not answered through harmony. It was answered through leverage, money, and family separation. That is what makes the Murdoch saga so revealing. In public, succession is often framed as legacy. In reality, it can look more like a settlement, not a coronation, a payout. The Murdoch dynasty reveals how modern power families really operate. Empires are not held together by image alone. They are held together by structures, loyalty, and control. Rupert Murdoch built one of the most influential media empires in the modern world. But like every dynasty, the real test begins when power moves from the founder to the next generation. Some families lose control of their empires, others reinvent them, and a few manage to hold power for decades. The Murdochs have reached exactly that moment, because behind every empire, there is a family, and every family follows its own rules. This is the Dynasty Code. If you want to understand how other powerful families build, protect, and sometimes lose their empires, make sure to subscribe and watch the next episode, because the story of power never ends with just one dynasty.